How's it going, everyone? Today we got this generator working for the first time in years, and we started noticing there's a small leak. I don't know where the leak is coming from, so we're going to make a how-to video, how to diagnose a leak from the carburetor. Now, a leaky carburetor is going to have three main reasons for leaking, or possibilities from leaking. First one is going to be obvious. Needle and seat. Needle and that has this little float attached to a needle. We might look at it, might not. I might just have to bring another one out. Don't know yet. We'll discuss that. And then could very well be a gasket, or it could be the actual fuel line itself. Potentially there's a fourth one of damage to the carb, but if nothing really happened or wasn't frozen or anything like that, you generally don't have to worry about that one, but keep that fourth one in the back of your mind when researching this. So first things first, where is it leaking from? Now, in general, if it is leaking due to a needle and seat issue, so there's a float, that's exactly what it says. It floats in the fuel in the bowl of the carb. The bowl is the bottom part of the carburetor, which is right here on this one. They're exactly the same on everything. There's a bowl, there's a float. That needle presses up against this little hole, cuts off the fuel supply when that float pushes the needle up. It's a gravity-fed system, so there's very little pressure. The pressure of the buoyancy of the float is able to surpass the pressure of the fuel, and it shuts off. Boom, done. Now, then another way to kind of figure this out, or a way of figuring this out, is simply by looking at the throat of the carb. Is it wet? This one is not. So I'm not going to go over how to remove this cover, but I want to remove the cover. I want to take a good look at that carburetor before we make any type of judgment what our next step is. At this point in time, in order for me to get better engagement, as I'm told by my analytics, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to fix this one, but I'm going to go over the fixes for all of them at the end. I'm not sure when part of the end. I might start rambling at the end, so you don't know, so watch the whole video. But until then, watch that until you find your answer. At this point in time, we're going to look at the throat of the carb. And the carb itself does look a little wet in there, but this just got done running, so that's 100% the problem, or abnormal. If it was leaking from the throat, there'd be fuel all the way down on the, if you have a different cover obviously, but your cover itself would be overfilling. Another thing, if yours is not level, or excuse me, if your intake is below, let me put this in a different way. See how the carb is level with the intake, also level with the, the inlet for the air. If yours, for whatever reason, had a pipe or a tube going down, fuel could potentially be going in there. Even level, it could be going in there and causing it not to overflow out this end. But in general, you would be able to tell if it's coming out due to the overfilling of the bowl through the throat of the carb. If for any reason you do suspect, or you do have a scenario where it does have a little bit of a downslope, check your oil, smell for fuel. Now, why do you have to check it for fuel smell? Fuel would actually go into the cylinder if your valve's open, and will actually go past the rings into the fuel, into the oil, and then you'll smell it. If it's been doing it for long enough, that is. So I'm going to go ahead and finish taking this off. I just want to show that it's not pouring down the side or anything, so we might have a different problem, but we very well might not. It's been a few minutes, so everything appears to be dry so far in the carb, and the fuel's off. That's a key thing. If you don't have the ability to turn off your fuel, I'd get a pair of vice grips and grip it. You don't need to waste fuel. However, something we're going to want to look at is, where is it dripping? We already know it's probably not coming from the throat, but let's turn it on. Do you see it? I see it. That is a bad fuel line, or maybe a bad connection. Maybe it came loose when installing it. Don't know. Let's try the easy way first and just try tightening it. If you don't have a fuel clamp on there, that could also be your problem. That one does have a fuel clamp, so don't know why it would be leaking. It could be a bad fuel line in general. Move the clamp a little bit further down. Some machines have guides for fuel lines. Those guides, when installing the guide, can actually pull the fuel line out. This one has this weird little clip here that I personally think is stupid, but whatever. So the fuel is on, and it appears to be dry. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to put you off to the corner. You're going to kind of look at my back a little bit. Unfortunately, I'm sorry, but I'm going to fulfill my promise of explaining how to fix the other two potential common issues. Okay, I lied. I have a little show and tell for one of them. So this is going to be a lot different than obviously the machine we're working on, but every carb is the same. Same basic thought. This is the float. The carb normally sits like this. And thinking about that, fuel will rise. The bowl is right about here. Fuel will rise, and the float, when in its normal position, is down, letting fuel in. You see, you can't really tell, but there's a little needle in there. And this is where the fuel goes in. There's a little L that the fuel travels through, and then the needle kind of blocks the entryway of that end of the L. And then when it fills up, it slowly starts to move, till it starts to make a seal. Now, if you're rebuilding a carburetor, you can tell if this is bad by holding it upside down and blowing in through here. You can also get like a little pump and put a little vacuum on there, and it's just more expense and more hassle. If you can blow through this with it upside down, it's bad. If you can't, it's good. Like I said, this is a gravity-fed system. If you have a fuel pump, yes, you might want to go down the avenue of getting that vacuum equipment, but or if you are working on a 2-cycle carburetor, that vacuum equipment can also be very helpful, because a 2-cycle carburetor, 99% of them are different. They have a different style, same theory, but different way of doing it. So the vacuum is definitely important for that. But anyway, for this one, that's how the float and needle works. The seat is literally just a smooth surface. Sometimes you have a piece of round rubber in there, depending on the style of carb you have. And the needle itself will either be a smooth tip, or it could have a rubber tip. So it just depends on the style of carburetor you have, but same principle, same idea for every single style of carburetor. It's not too difficult. It's basic physics. As I mentioned before, could be a gasket leaking. Now, I could do show and tell. In fact, maybe I will. You never know. Let's go ahead and take our show and tell carburetor out. There's usually a gasket around the bowl, and on some of them, this one's a little weird because it has 4 screw holes. Oh, excuse me, 2. But on most of them, let's grab one that actually will be a good representation. Has something like this. That nut sometimes is just a retaining nut that will just hold it on, or it could be the jet, don't know, it doesn't really matter. But there's a little gasket in there, and if the gasket's compromised or not tight enough, then it can leak through there. In addition to that, it could also be leaking from the bowl gasket itself. That's almost always rubber or some type of cork. It just makes a seal between the bowl, which, like I said, is the bottom part, and the body of the carb. If for any reason, if it is like the cork material, if it's too damaged or too compressed, it's not going to make a good seal. If it's the rubber, maybe it's cracked. Rubber over time does crack, so you might need to replace it. To replace that, what you're going to need to do is you need to look up your specific carburetor and either just buy a new replacement for that, or you're going to need to buy a whole rebuild kit. And to be honest, if you're going down that avenue of oh, this is the scary part. Okay, if you're already going down the avenue of, make sure my fuel line didn't come off again, because it didn't do this until late last time. Anyway, if you're going down the avenue of having to buy parts, just buy a rebuild kit. The rebuild kit's going to have all the gaskets, depending on which one you need. Just get everything nice and clean, put the new one on, put it back together, boom, done. Hopefully it should work. So that's how you fix all three major problems. The fourth one's an easy one. If there's physical damage to the carb, you could go down the realm of welding it. Horrible idea. Works 0.4% time. Just buy a new one. Aftermarket carbs are always available. They're usually fairly decent. OEM ones are always going to be available unless you have a really obscure and old machine. You're going to have to buy a new one. That's how it works. And if you want to go down the road of saving a few bucks, or if you're in a pinch, you could try welding it, but you're going to need an AC welder. And that in of itself is kind of, I don't want to say rare, but not nearly as common. Just want to make sure we're still dry. And we are. Okay, perfect. So we now have fixed a leaking carburetor. I didn't really go over, this is why I'm trying to get your engagement. I told you have to kind of continue on. I didn't really explain why the needle and seat don't always, play nicely with each other. Majority of the time, it's dirt. Maybe some sediment. Maybe it got stuck. Don't know. So to fix that, like I mentioned, you never actually told you how it was fixed. You need to clean it very thoroughly. If you have a rubber seat, you need to replace it. If you don't have a rubber seat and you just have a rubber tip needle, look at a needle, make sure nothing's wrong with the needle. If there's a hint of anything on it, buy a new needle or buy a new rebuild kit. It should be all in one. Rebuild kits should usually include a needle. So, or if you have a rubber tipped needle and you do not have a rubber, I need to put the tube on. You do not have a rubber seat, then what you can also do is you can take a Q-tip, and if you go to pretty much anywhere that sells auto supplies, you can get some of that orange hand cleaner. It smells like oranges. And if you get the one with grit in it, you can take a little bit of a Q-tip and put a Q-tip in your drill, put the drill inside where the seat is, polish it up. You can get the stuff without the tip, or excuse me, without the grit. It potentially might be safer, but it's going to be a little bit of a longer process. You can also use valve grinding compound, also in basically any automotive store. Sometimes it's just called valve lapping compound, not valve grinding. Usually grinding valves are not a good thing, but depending on what one you have, you can also put that on the end of a Q-tip. Helpful hint on the Q-tip: most Q-tips are too wide, so it helps if you kind of take off some of the cotton and then use the whatever method, hand cleaner, valve grinding compound. You could just put brake cleaner if it's just gooey. Whatever you want to use. Personally, unless it's really, really bad, I take the Q-tip, take off some cotton, take a little bit of brake clean or carb clean, get it cleaned up. Look at it real close. If you have a good phone, maybe take a picture if your eyesight's not very good and see if you can zoom in and see if there's any imperfections. If you have any type of scope, that's even better, but I don't even have one of those, and I do this for a hobby all the time. What else? Yeah, you just look in there and you just try to figure out if there's any type of imperfection at all, and if there is a slightest of imperfections, then you have to do some type of resurfacing. Now, resurfacing of the seat surface can potentially cause problems. So you don't really, if you don't know what you're doing, or basically what I'm saying is don't just go all in super fast. You want to make sure that you're doing it correctly. And what I mean by that is you want to make sure you're not going to damage it by over grinding it or over resurfacing it. If you do that, then you're just wasting the carburetor. So small increments is always better. You don't need to be super in a hurry with this type of thing. What is that saying? Like, slow is fast and fast is slow. That makes sense in this situation. Do small increments, look at it, clean it, still bad, keep going. The ones without the rubber seat are kind of the more difficult ones in my opinion. Rubber seat's really easy. All you have to do is just buy a new seat. They make tools, because what you end up having to do, it only goes in one way. Majority of the time, that one way, there's a little ridge on the seat itself. Oh, that's right. There's one more screw in the back. And the ridge almost always goes face down or down into the carburetor. So when you look down at it, when you install it, you do not see it. If for any reason you're having a hard time installing it, an Allen key, a clean Allen key, is your friend. Find one, shove it down there. Maybe put a little oil, WD-40, help make sure it doesn't go in the wrong way. And you should be good to go. If I can find my last 10 millimeters, that would be amazing. And that's it. That's the easy part. The hard part sometimes is removing it. If you have an air compressor, go to full pressure, go in the inlet of the carburetor, and then just give it a good squirt of air right in here. Usually the seat will just pop right out. Sometimes. If it doesn't, a pick with a very small little angle at the end of it. There's a sewing tool. I don't remember what exactly it's called, but I've seen them before being used and appears to have worked. Tecumseh also makes this tool. It is part number 670377. This actually is meant for that, installing seats only. So that could be something if you want to do this more routinely. So the rubber seat, in my opinion, is always the easy part. It's the non-rubber ones that are the hard part. Because even though the rubber tip needle is easier, it's going to be harder on the other end. So, hopefully that helped you out. I know that was a lot of talking. To be honest, I wasn't quite sure what was wrong with this one. Luckily, it's just a fuel line. If you can see if it's leaking by the inlet of a fuel line, and you replace the fuel line or you tighten it like we did, and it still is leaking, that's number 4. That's damage to the carb. Don't go down the road of JB welding. Just buy a new carb. JB weld on a carburetor is just going to fail over time, especially if it's a machine you count on. Don't do that. Just buy a new carb. So we got lucky. It was just a loose fuel line. Somehow got nudged, lodged out, whatever. And we were able to just put it back on and it works. No leaking. Fuel is on, so we don't have to worry. Everything is still dry. Nothing's going. So we're good to go. I'm going to go ahead and leave you at that. If you like what you see, put a thumbs up. That helps me out a lot. Put a comment. That also helps. If you have any questions, leave a comment. I'd be happy to answer it. If you need any personalized help, definitely consider becoming a member. One of the perks of becoming a member is personalized help. I'll be happy to help out however I can. And other than that, I'll see you on the next one. You have a good rest of your evening.